Welcome to Truth Behind Travel Podcast, a platform for tourism, travel, and hospitality professionals and enthusiasts to share, learn, and unlearn what we need to create better tourism, protect the environment, and become better humans. I'm your host, Dolores Semeraro, and every week I bring on the podcast the voices of those out there making a difference to learn the hard truth behind the world of travel and tourism, what works and what we can collectively do better. Here we are on Truth Behind Travel Podcast today, April 2026, and we are about to deep dive in what happens at the intersection between tourism and travel experiences and technology. How are experienced operators navigating these times, and what kind of mindset is a must-have to gain and maintain integrity and authenticity when it comes to selling experiences online, and what kind of experiences really are easier to sell today and why. A conversation that took several unexpected turns and ended with some serious golden nuggets. For those listening to the podcast that are in the experience business, you do not want to miss that. My guest today is Aaron Fessler, a serial entrepreneur and a visionary leader with a career defined by building high-scale infrastructure and disruptive technology. Today, he is the CEO and founder of TripWorks. Aaron has dedicated himself to solving the fragmentation crisis in the tours, activities, and attraction industry. Let's get right to it with Aaron Fessler. Welcome back to the podcast. We are here with Aaron. I can't wait to get started. Welcome.
Good morning. Thank you. Good to be here.
Well, you have an impressive past in terms of professional experiences. You're a serial entrepreneur. You kind of have a thing, if I may say so, looking at your profile, you have a thing for good ideas, and then you kind of push them forward, even when it's difficult, or many people perhaps thinking like, is this even possible? You just go through it and you just make it happen. Before we start with the podcast, I always ask my guests to give a little bit of an introduction of your journey and what made you what you are today, what brought you where you are today with TripWorks.
Well, thank you. Yes, I'm happy to be here and share a bit of my background and past with you today. So I always had an interest in a business and in cars from a very young age. My very first car was a Chevette with 3-speed stick transmission, and I think I spent $300 on that car. And I'm going to come back to that later in my story. You'll see why that detail is relevant. I spent the first portion of my career primarily developing technology. We built and sold a couple of very successful technology companies that solved a variety of problems. Along the way, my earnings increased a little bit, and I began to get nicer and nicer cars. And then after I sold my second technology company, I thought, life's short. I'd like to try something a bit different. And so I left technology and I moved to tourism. I began to reunite that passion I had for cars. I'll never forget the first time I ever drove a car on a racetrack, and that thrill stuck with me. And so I thought, how can I share that passion with others? And I ended up buying a struggling tourist attraction, and I began to see how difficult it is to have a tourist attraction that's built from passion. The economics are often challenging, and the needs of an operator to tell their story well and get people excited about their passion is no small joke. But after a couple of years, ultimately that idea grew into something bigger, and I ended up getting 100 acres on the Strip in Las Vegas and developing from scratch and launching a fairly significant tourist attraction called Speed Vegas. And so it was interesting because at that point, my past passion from that first Chevette that I drove, the years that I spent developing enterprise software began to really fuel some significant success that we had in sharing that passion with visitors in Las Vegas. Ultimately, that business is really done quite well. It'll do around $40 million in revenues this year. There have been about 500,000 visitors that have gone through that attraction. So if listeners want to check that out, they're welcome to. But later, I took everything that we learned in building that business from zero to where it is today, and that became the heartbeat and the DNA behind TripWorks. And that's what we're here to talk about today. But ultimately, my experiences both in building a tourist attraction and then providing software to help other tourist attractions grow and scale and solve their problems. That's really what we do today.
Interesting. You call them tourism attractions, and it's almost feels like a product sort of tone of voice kind of definition. Whilst nowadays, whatever attraction we're talking about, the industry loves to call them experiences. And experiences are really kind of personal, right? Like how does that connect with the business side of things?
Yeah, what a great question. And I'll perhaps pause and say that I do use attraction and experience somewhat interchangeably, but left to my own devices, I do favor the word experience. I think what I learned at Speed Vegas is that people were not coming because we had a 2 p.m. time slot. They're coming because they had seen a red Ferrari in a magazine and they wanted to experience the thrill of driving or touching or being close to that. That was absolutely a message that was driven home to me in the early days. We were selling an experience. This is not a commodity. This is not a 2 p.m. time slot. And that lesson, I think, deeply shaped how I think about the challenges that other attractions or experience operators sometimes solve well, but in many cases, I think there's room to do better. I think often they lose sight of the fact that they're here to make a dream come true today. They're not here to sell a commodity at 2 p.m.
I guess it's because we often see that the whole promotion line of things kind of starts from the price rather than from what it means to do that specific thing. So if you look at your past experiences and also what you're doing at TripWorks nowadays, if you were to say, look, this got to change in the way experiences are sold, what would that be?
That's exactly what it is. I would push, and I do push for much more of an emphasis on storytelling. Much less emphasis on automating the waiver click paths and the confirmation email, and we'll perhaps get to that a bit later. But it's got to be around storytelling. It's less about optimizing for distribution and more about selling an experience. I'll never forget, we would have these streams of visitors who would come through, and you'd see the looks on their faces when you would execute that well and do that well. They were there not because the waiver process was done elegantly. They were there because you had told a story that excited them.
And when you talk to other operators to come on board and say, well, so many experiences, and I myself, I'm about to really slow drive across the states in the US and probably experience, so to say in brackets for those who are listening, a lot of things that perhaps I cannot even find online. And that's because whoever sells these experiences or put them at the availability and put them available for people to have access to it may not have that technology knowledge. It's not an even ground out there. So when you work with these operators, how do you make sure that you bring them on board through trainings, or is it the sales speech, or I'm curious to see what brings them together?
One of the things that we've learned is fundamentally an enabling technology for attractions is that giving them more options is not particularly helpful. And you're right, they need direction. It's not that they don't have access to technology. It's knowing what they need to prioritize next. There's a huge gap in maturity across different operators, and a lot of them don't really understand the real problem they need to solve. And again, it's that emphasis on storytelling. It's less about the function of come at 2:00 and bring your flip-flops. That's not really selling the vision. It's the emotion, it's the smell, it's the feeling. I would love to take you sometime to Speed Vegas. One of the things I think that that we did really well there was removing the barriers between the visitor and the actual vehicles themselves. And so if you went there today, you'd be invited to, even if you hadn't spent a penny, to sit in the cars and to touch them and to get your picture taken behind them. There's another portion where we really wanted to make it an emotional experience. And so there's a very popular drifting experience, and that's a professional driver, and I think it's $99. You ride next to him, and the tires squeal and the smoke goes. It does not make money at all. But what it does is you cannot escape this visceral, emotional feeling of seeing these cars doing donuts and smoke and the drama. And so we figured out how to take that feeling and bottle it up during the shopping experience. And if you walk through the shopping experience, that's what would come through, not come at 2:00 and you must wear closed-toed sandals. I think we really did a great job of pushing down the functional part of it and very much promoting the storytelling part of it. Very important.
Let's say if I get online and I look for best things to do or what to do here or there, and what I need is something compelling. I need a compelling copy, an appealing image or a video,
Yes.
even better.
It's funny that you highlight image, and I know this is primarily audio, but if in the background, just out of frame, you'll see a bunch of photos. There are one or two photos which I think at Speed Vegas really did that well. And for me, the litmus was very simple. When looking at an operator's attraction or activity or experience, the question I would have is, when you see that photo, do you feel something? Literally, do you feel the synapses? Like, do you feel the tingle in your body from looking at that image? If you do, that's a great picture. It's usually a person with a big grin. There's something of something. There are a few pieces I think that define a photo that tell a story well. And I would say 10% of operators get that well. Really critical to sell the picture well and make sure that your buyers feel something. You have to actually feel something.
It's more of a connection, right? You need to create a connection. At each image calls for a different kind of connection. It calls for longing, like, oh, I wish I was there. It calls for jealousy, kind of want to like, look at me kind of thing. And then every emotion leads to a different sort of purchase reaction, purchase behavior as such. Those that really buy quickly. It's like, yep, I want it. That's it. That's what I like to do. And some other are instead thinking about it, double checking, looking online to see what others are saying. When I work on different strategies with operators selling, primarily improving their storytelling, what happens is that they have this attention and they're focused primarily on describing the experience, and then they fail to deliver in the selling part, in the let's say the clicks and the buys and the payment gateways and all that. So it's a fine balance. But if a payment doesn't work, I have no time to lose. I go somewhere else. I buy the same experience where it's more efficient. And so the platform kind of gains and loses on that. Because of that, do you think that bringing these type of experiences and focusing on how to sell them online and make them easily accessible, does that actually build strength and resilience in the ecosystem, or build dependability on the system?
Well, I think what you might be getting at is that technology needs to be invisible and reliable. The point at which the customer notices the technology, I think maybe there's a clue that we've gone off the rails in some meaningful way. I think that's an important distinction. It's like my power company. My relationship with them, I don't want to talk to them. I want it to be completely invisible to me. So we definitely see our role as technology providers for experiences as being, it needs to be stable, boring, solid, needs to melt into the background.
So when you start noticing it, it means it's probably going too heavy or too long or too annoying or something. Like if it's invisible, it gets through and it works.
Yes. And frankly, I think that's a particular concern in this modern era. And now, look, I love some shiny technology. I'll just be honest about that. But I do think there are some areas where our industry is chasing hype instead of value. And it's dangerous because it gets to the point where the technology comes to the forefront. You see that in everything from chatbots. There's just a lot of kinds of applications where the technology has come too close to the surface. And bad technology is worse than no technology. But bad chatbot is worse than no chatbot at all. I think some operators are maybe advised to critically evaluate the role of technology in selling their experience. It can give you a false sense of progress. They often optimize what's measurable instead of what matters. But at the end of the day, it really needs to melt into the background.
I like your point of hype instead of value. And I guess sometimes when this big momentum that artificial intelligence is having across the industry, I think that's quite the case. Have you seen, the good? I always like to kind of bring in the good, bad, and the ugly of this industry. But have you seen areas where it was just a hype rather than delivering value?
Yes, I do think that at the far end of the spectrum, success should be defined as a technology that is invisible and melts into the background. We've sort of established that. That's certainly a view, and technology is certainly bringing some real benefit and transformation to the back office, automation, scheduling, inventory, those types of things. I think the front end hype, though, is getting a little bit overrated. And you're seeing that played out. Everything from VR tours, hyper optimizing booking flows to squeeze out, marginal conversion gains. AI replacing humans, chatbots. We mentioned that a few different times. But I think operators should be cautious about the role, particularly in the front. And there's maybe another tension I would probably explore. Technology is ultimately pushing for standardization and same and consistency, but the tourism industry is selling an experience and human and connection and soft and uniqueness. So they're kind of at odds, right? And so in the absence of clarity, my recommendation to an experienced operator is to tilt toward the human. And if technology can provide some back office improvements, that's all great. But we can't push so hard for that improvement there that we sacrifice the human part. That's not gonna work.
This is so true. I mean, if you think of, we want to be unique and we want to be recognizable and relatable, and we're also different. If it's human experience, it needs to be presented and available to humans, because that's what it is.
Yes, that's right.
So when you look at I like how you call them the experience operators, what would be the baseline technology that you would recommend them to start with?
Well, I would probably start with the presentation, the storytelling, and the retailing. That's probably the highest return on investment. So efforts spent on telling the story well and telling a unique story, that's money well spent. And that's imagery, perhaps it's the promotional content, videos, web, social, like a lot of that stuff, I think is intertwined with technology, but that's the highest return on the investment. I think it starts to become a little bit muddier when you're looking at enablement technologies. And again, chatbots, we'll circle back to that, are a good example. You do have this area where sometimes it's difficult to tell a story with enough detail to satisfy everybody. And that's probably why you have this interest in things like chatbots, because you're like, I have questions and that are specific to me. I want to know if I come on a Tuesday and my spouse is pregnant and I don't have closed-toe shoes, I'd like to get that very specific answer. And folding that into a broad storytelling pitch is going to cloud it really quickly. And so there are places where technology can simplify things on the front end. The back end technology has got some great plays. Again, automation, communication, payments, making it so you can do Google Pay and Apple Pay, all that kind of stuff. I think that really removes a lot of friction from the process. But the biggest investment really needs to be telling the storytelling. Maybe an adjacent topic here is when we talk about the role of OTAs, online travel agents. It's a really adjacent topic here, and the reason it's so closely entwined is because if you follow closely, an OTA will commonly refer to an experienced operator as a quote supplier, which I find somewhat of a condescending term, but in practice, that's how it functions. So you could have 5 passionate, experienced operators in a market, all selling kayaking or stand-up paddleboarding activities, but that sort of gets shredded and stripped of its uniqueness and dignity and routed through a system and presented to the consumer with very little differentiation. And so the consumer doesn't particularly know whether they're buying A, B, C, or one of the 5. They're just buying a commodity at that point. It is the 2 p.m. paddleboarding thing up and down the river. And so, I think there's certainly a strong role for OTAs, and it's undeniable that OTAs have continued to take a larger portion of the overall activity. But I find myself wondering whether or not that's better for the buyer, and certainly deprives the operator from the opportunity to tell their story well.
And you think that if you observe the consumer behavior, we are going more and more towards directing our purchasing behavior towards the direct buying rather than shopping on an OTA website?
The OTAs do continue to dominate. You look at the overall share; it every year creeps a few points closer to OTAs and away from smaller operators. There's a bit of a mix. I think at the smaller end of the market, experienced operators that are boutique and maybe perhaps regional, they're increasingly struggling to tell their story well. It's really difficult to outgun a very sophisticated OTA with functional and unlimited budget and world-class resources and tremendous scale. So unfortunately, that does seem to be a trend. Well, unfortunate for the experienced operator, it's a trend that will likely continue. We do find that larger attractions, and again, Speed Vegas is a good example, they're fine, right? They usually have enough resources to tell their story directly to the consumer, to invest well, to instrument the business and figure out what makes it tick. We found that certainly at Speed Vegas. I think we went from spending very modest amounts of money to enormous amounts of money each month on paid advertising to reach consumers directly and tell our story. But that was only because we had the scale to do so. So it's a different story depending on where you fit in the experienced operator ecosystem. Bigger, easier, and good. Smaller, very challenging, and OTAs are really important.
And when they are, let's say, smaller operator and kind of scattered and a different level of technology awareness, and they don't even know what they may need or what they may use or what could be useful to them specifically. How much of that you observe in terms of market education rather than bringing a new client into the pod?
Yeah, look, you can't build a great experience for a market that doesn't understand what you do yet. So I would say it's 70% education and 30% technology. I don't think at that end of the market that operators need more tools. They need more clarity. They benefit well from education on how to tell their story well. So I wouldn't say the problem is software. It's often understanding. Technology gives you options, but it certainly doesn't help you out of the box tell your story by itself. That's the hard part.
And what's the main resistance? I'm curious, that you see and that you notice, when, especially for example, in terms of technology adoption, what are the main concerns? It's like, no, I don't need it because, or like, what do you mainly notice?
Someone on our team that worked with an operator just this morning, and this particular operator was building some APIs to optimize their some internal back office process. And to me, I think that's exactly what the industry gets wrong. I do see there's this tendency to over-engineer small problems because they're measurable. Right. So the bigger problems that are more difficult to measure, demand, conversions, experience quality, storytelling, those don't get the same attention. I think that's a danger. Technology can give you a false sense of progress. That's a danger we run into a lot.
I'm curious to see what's the sort of like the age range of entrepreneurs or business owners that you currently work with.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that. I'm not sure that I could cleanly bucket it by age. I really don't. I think it's more of a mindset and an attitude. I find there are just as many experienced operators, later in their careers that are hungry and passionate and growth oriented. And I find there are plenty of, people early in their career who have an over-reliance on technology, that see technology solving all of the problems and, as I described earlier, optimizing the wrong things and thinking really hard about conversion rates at the expense of storytelling. So I think it's really more of a mindset. And so internally we speak about growth-oriented operators versus fixed mindset operators. A growth-oriented operator is one who's very passionate about and hungry for learning and experimenting, but not just about technology. They appropriately see the role of technology as enabling, but not the end all. I will say that in the last 24 months, even 12, that the tide has shifted a little bit. I think today many people are unsettled. I lived the .com era and some other chapters along the way, and this does feel like that moment where you find yourself wondering, is it different this time? Is this a transformational moment? And I think that it is. I'm fond of saying that I believe that, we're in a once in a lifetime shift, and it's going to move all the dollars from party A to party B. Problem is, I don't know who A is or who B is, but I absolutely believe it's a big reset. And so culturally, I think you find that perspective omnipresent. It's in every social media post. It's in every news article. It's cocktail party conversation. And so even operators who perhaps are normally resistant and happy with status quo are more receptive to change than they have been in the past. They're more concerned about their future. And look, for many experienced operators, this is their livelihood. They're supporting their family, they're supporting their community, and so they are. No one wants to die, and so I would say there's definitely more acceptance and more of a growth-oriented mindset than we saw maybe even a year or two ago.
Are you able to sort of visualize what kind of experiences are very easy to work with rather than others, perhaps? Because I know that people listening to the podcast may be working in nature conservation, wildlife, sustainability, regeneration, and there's a lot there that there's a story that struggles to get told properly and struggles to get the attention. So if you see a range of experiences or a cluster of experiences that are easier, that you find the operators are easier to present and to market online?
I do. I would say that structurally, activities that are close to water tend to do well. Maybe I'll back up a little bit. It almost doesn't matter what your perspective is about where you think that AI will take humanity and society down the road. I think that I've concluded that there are a few constants. I think one of the constants is that you and I will remain human. I don't think that's going to change. What does that mean? That means that you and I are going to taste and touch and smell and see and do. I don't think AI changes our biological humanity. So getting back to your question about which types of operators and experienced operators do better, those that are close to water seem to satisfy some primal need, and that's snorkeling, that's boat tours, that's whale watching, that's ecotourism, it's kayaking, it's paddle. All that stuff seems to do particularly well. They also tend to struggle less with seasonality, which is often a challenge for operators that are in some markets that struggle to run year-round business. They're out there, but they tend to struggle a bit more. Operators that have invested in physical assets generally tend to do better. They have helicopters, or they have jet skis, or boats, or those sorts of things. They tend to have as a result, have larger average operations, which tends to allow them to invest more in resources, attract better talent. That's not to say that solo operators do well, but they tend to be smaller and sometimes tend to struggle a bit more.
Interesting. So almost feels like whatever activity is easier to like the no-brainers, basically. Being close to, let's say the wellness part. Recently, also a lot of talk about longevity tourism. How the tourism industry loves to jump on big words. What is longevity tourism anyway? Like,
I actually don't know. That's a great. You're educating me. I don't know what a longevity tour is.
It's a variation of how wellness and well-being brings you into a state of self-preservation, and it's a whole different thing that is coming. We will explore it on the podcast. I'm also curious to learn a bit more about it. Let's pin it as let's say the top 5 things that any experienced operator willing to present themselves online should take into consideration. So ease of understanding, number 1. So it's got to be easy. What is it? I need to understand it within 60 seconds, for example. It's got to be relevant to me. So do I like it? Do I not like it? Am I fit for it? What else would you add to it?
Yeah, I'm as you're speaking, I'm thinking exactly back to my experience at Speed Vegas, and one of the things that made that business somewhat easier to engage in great storytelling was the visual nature of it. If you can't sell a red Ferrari drive in Las Vegas, frankly, you're not very good at storytelling. And so that's not something that's true for every type of attraction or experience. It was certainly important in that business. So it was very, very easy in 15 seconds to communicate emotion, energy, excitement, passion not so easy in some. So I'm curious when I think of a longevity experience, how I would communicate that passion in 30 seconds visually. How I would tell that story. I'd have to think about that.
I'll pin that podcast when it comes out.
Okay. And then I want to walk back. One other thing, I'm going to reach over here. I indicated that some things are easier than others. I keep holding up here a rock. This rock is about the size of my fist. It's been sitting on my desk here for about 10 years. It's one of the few things that I have here on my desk. I have this rock because, don't kid yourself, moving 500,000 cubic yards of dirt and building a racetrack on the Strip in Las Vegas is incredibly hard. There was a point at which we had reached a rough point, and I went out there one day and I was very frustrated. I picked up a rock and I threw it. I was just really struggling. And in that moment, I felt the struggle, and I had the foresight to pick up the rock and keep it. And when I look at this rock today, I'm reminded that everything worth doing has struggle. If it hurts, that doesn't necessarily mean you're doing it wrong. Sometimes I think that building a tourist attraction is probably like going to the gym, which I don't do a lot of, but if you're doing it right, it hurts. Right. If you're doing it right, it hurts. So I would probably offer this word of encouragement to anyone building a passion-led experience. Yeah, it's going to hurt and it's going to be hard. I don't think any of them are easy. Really don't.
That is when you look back and you look at the struggle and the sweat and sometimes even the frustration tears of a project that came to life. And then you look ahead and you think of, for example, right now as a CEO of TripWorks and the company you've built, and where, based on this body of experience that you bring in, some things may feel easier now, but there are other things that still feel quite challenging. So if you look into I would say, in the next few years, because we can't really say in a much longer span of time, because tourism changes, travel demands changes, dynamics, geodynamics, climate dynamics, so everything is influencing it. So if some things feel a bit easier right now for you in this moment in time, in your career, in your work, in your passion, what feels challenging?
I would say that's a pretty profound question, and I'm trying to think of the right way to approach that. I would say one of the challenges in the technology industry that we're all facing is, I wouldn't say it's quite existential, but pretty close to it. We are finding a pretty dramatic reshaping of our roles. There is a tremendous portion of our industry that fundamentally moves information from left to right. That's what it does. That's what we do. I look at some information. You and I are exchanging some information today. Your listeners will be listening to this information, and what they're going to do is they're going to take that information. They're going to distill it down to something, compress it. They're going to listen to an hour's worth of content, and they're going to conclude something. And what are they going to do with that? They're going to pass that to somebody else in the form of a Medium post or a shared link or a text message or to inner passion, and that person will do the same thing, and it will happen over and over and over until ultimately, if you think about it, it converts itself into action in the physical world. It's probably an experienced operator. They're going to put gas in an ATV. They're going to open the door of a shuttle van. That's kind of where it stops. But all the stuff in front of that, which is where I sit, is dramatically changing. And so for many people in the information industry, it's a very unsettling time. And so it's hard because you're trying to anticipate what is likely to come next. So circling back to my earlier comment, at least I hang my hat on our humanity. At the end of the day, experienced operators should be comforted in knowing that people are still going to want to get their feet wet. They're still going to see the fish. They're still going to climb the mountain. That won't change. So maybe they're in a better position than us. We'll see.
I pinned a word earlier in preparation for our conversation, that is empathy. And there's a lot of that comes into play when you want to make the end customer, so to speak, the person who buys up the experience. You want to make that person happy, but you want to make the experience creator happy, even happier, if anything, because that person needs to deliver, or that person needs to work with the team that then delivers. So empathy, I think, remains paramount, and it's probably something that I don't feel will dry out in this,
That's right. That's right. Yes. Yes, exactly. The idea of our humanity remaining, empathy won't go away. So the changes in technology and AI specifically, I don't really think they're going to change our empathy. I will say that was one of the things, if you asked me what single thing I appreciated most about running an experience operation or an attraction was just that. It was making people happy. It's just that simple. I had come from a technology business. We sold enterprise software to movie studios. They had a problem with piracy, the most recent one, and we sold a problem to make online piracy less bad. You couldn't make it go away. You can make it less bad. So the dynamic is every month we would go meet with Sony Pictures and Paramount and Fox, and we would say, great news, you paid us X dollars and we made your pad problem less bad. Structurally, that's a hard conversation to have. They're going to argue you didn't, for the money we gave you, you didn't make the bad problem not bad enough-ish. And so, there's no finish line, there's no mission accomplished, there's no sense of completion. When you put someone in a red Ferrari in Las Vegas and watch them drive it for a few laps and get out and take the sweaty helmet off, the look on their face is priceless. It was a very, very satisfying dynamic. You saw people who had a dream and to one day do what they're doing today. It was very satisfying. So I admire that for experienced operators who get to live that out and share their passion every day. That's a truly a gift to people to have that as a career.
As a calling, in a way, right?
Yes.
Like you do something that you do it because you're passionate about it. Doesn't even feel like work. Like for me, I started in hospitality, but tourism, travel, I could not see myself working in any other industry. It's just, it brings me, especially with the podcast, it brings me joy to have the opportunity to learn firsthand. I feel very privileged. I've learned a lot from you today, and to be able to create a conversation that gets then shared and people can listen to it, learn from it, be inspired. And so I always like to end the conversation with a word of advice, from the guests that come on the podcast. And I love the one you kind of like spoiled it a bit when you said it earlier. But if we can go back to that and you see people now working in the experience industry and in such a gigantic big blob of things, that this desire to conform and to kind of be, if that is working, I've got to do that too. So we tend to become more of the same rather than, especially online, because becomes slave of what works online, the algorithms and so on. So if you look at that, what will be your word of advice for experienced operators?
Great setup. I would say at the end of the day, people are traveling for the experience, not for the system, not for the software, not for the 2 p.m. The experience is what they're buying. That's the product. Everything should support that. If they get one thing right, it's building around the experience, the storytelling. The future of their business, every experienced operator in our industry, it isn't more tech, it's better use of tech. I need more tools, need more decisions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Love the conversation. All the contact details to reach out to you and to your team at TripWorks will be in the show notes of the podcast perpetually. So at any time, whoever is listening to the episode can reach out for questions or even to request a demo, if anything. The website is pretty straightforward. Thank you so much for taking the time to have a chat with me today. Loved it. Thank you so much, Aaron.
Thank you. So nice to chat today.
Thank you so much for being with us on the podcast today. The contact details and all the information to reach out to Aaron and learn about TripWorks are in the show notes and will be there every time you listen to this podcast. If you have any questions related to what we discussed today, I encourage you and I invite you to reach out and get in touch. If you wish to present yourself as a podcast speaker, maybe you want to tell your story, maybe you're navigating a challenge that you feel would be useful for others to learn from, please get in touch. These are the conversations we want to have on the podcast moving forward. We want to learn what is going on the ground of the travel and tourism industry. Thank you once again, and I will see you soon on the next episode of Truth Behind Travel Podcast.